To hide something forever, sometimes all it takes is to stop talking about it. When archaeologists first lifted the lid of an ancient Egyptian grain silo and looked inside, they didn't find gold, mummies, or inscriptions. Just a handful of dried seeds, dull, tasteless, forgotten. And yet, those seeds once held the power to feed an empire, to outlast a drought, to fill temples with the scent of boiling herbs. Their names are now lost, but they were real, picked with calloused hands, cooked in smoky huts, and chewed while sitting by the Nile. Vegetables that no longer exist. The life of an ordinary farmer in ancient Egypt revolved around the river. When the water came, it left behind soft mud where everything could grow. When it receded, the real work began. People grew wheat, barley, sometimes beans, but there were other plants too, ones that didn't need much care, ones that saved lives in bad years. And one of the most important among them was the lotus. Today, we think of the lotus as a beautiful flower. Back then it was food, real food. In still waters and warm marshes, the lotus would reach for the sun with its white petals. But the treasure lay beneath the surface. Its roots, thick and filled with pale flesh, were pulled from the silt by bare hands or feet. They were rinsed, boiled, fried, soft to the bite, slightly sweet. Poor families ate them when there was no bread. They didn't plant lotus. It simply grew wherever there was moisture. And it wasn't just the roots. Lotus seeds were tough, almost like nuts. Ground into flour, they were added to porridge. The petals were steeped into tea. Even the leaves were used to cover food and keep flies away. Nothing went to waste. People knew the lotus like an old companion. They didn't speak of it often, but they couldn't survive without it. The lotus wasn't just food, it was sacred. Its blossoms symbolized new life. It was placed in tombs, offered in temples. It stayed with a person from birth to death. Everyone who lived by the river knew it. It asked for little and gave much in return. But everything changed. Dams were built. The places where the lotus once bloomed dried up. People began to grow new crops, ones easier to sell. They left the water, left the mud, left the lotus. It's no longer gathered. Its taste is forgotten. Only in old drawings can you still see someone holding a flower in their hand. It wasn't just the lotus that disappeared. An entire way of life vanished. A time when food was close by and survival meant knowing where to look. When there were no stores and a single root found in a swamp could keep a family alive. We lost more than just a plant. We lost a way of living. Now we eat vegetables from shelves, shiny, identical, grown by the clock. But they don't remember hardship. The lotus did. It grew when everything else died. It fed when hope was gone. And it vanished when people no longer needed to be saved. The lotus was the first, but it wasn't the last. Sometimes food wasn't just food. It was a shield, a scent that kept illness away, a bitterness that stopped death in its tracks. In ancient Egypt, that shield was garlic. Garlic wasn't planted neatly in rows. It appeared on its own, between stones near water, in the cracks of clay walls. No one invited it, but it came anyway. Its smell hit you before you even bent down to the ground, sharp, pungent, heavy. And that scent, Egyptians believed, was a kind of protection. People harvested garlic early in the morning, before the heat of the day could scorch the air. They pulled it up by the roots, cleaned it carefully, and hung it to dry under makeshift shelters. It was a regular part of meals, but even more so part of daily life. Bundles of garlic were hung above doorways, tucked under beds, rubbed onto walls. It wasn't just a plant, it was the home's guardian. Garlic made its way into food almost every day. It was mixed into porridge, blended with vinegar, mashed with beans. Sometimes it was eaten raw with a piece of bread. It stirred the appetite, improved flavor, and helped the body process coarse, heavy meals. It was especially common during the hottest times of year, when water spoiled quickly and stomachs suffered. People believed garlic cleansed the body from the inside out, but its importance went far beyond the kitchen. Egyptians thought garlic could protect against the evil eye. If a child came down with a fever, they rubbed garlic on the child's forehead. When a stranger entered the home, The air was cleansed with garlic smoke. Sometimes the dead were even buried holding a clove of garlic, just in case evil tried to follow their soul. Garlic was part of working life too. Laborers building the pyramids were given garlic daily. That's not a myth. Written records show that garlic, along with onions and radishes, was part of their regular rations. It strengthened the body, it gave endurance, and yet it vanished. Modern cultivars replaced the wild kind. Those small, potent, musky bulbs gave way to large, smooth, uniform ones. What once grew without effort became a commodity, and wild garlic disappeared into places no one looks anymore. People stopped believing in its power. Fear of illness faded, and with it so did the charm. The anxious nights passed, and no one hangs garlic over a baby's bed anymore. All that remains is a faint trace in recipes, in language, in the memories of the elderly. And still, wild garlic mattered more than we remember. It stood between a person and their fear, between the body and disease. It grew when everything else failed. It didn't need to be bought, only found. It was plants like this that made life possible in a valley where heat dried the air and the water could vanish any year. They didn't ask for praise, only respect. Garlic was the second forgotten hero, but behind it stood another, a leaf that nourished when there was no bread. Her name was mallow. Not every plant is waited for. Some just appear when they're needed the most. Mallow was one of those. It wasn't planted in neat rows, nor gathered into baskets to be sold at market. It grew on its own, beside walls, under trees, near wells. Its leaves were broad and soft, like a hand gently covering a child's eyes to shield them from fear. Every household knew it, though few called it by name. It was simply the herb you boil when there's no bread. Mallow didn't save people on holidays, but on days of hardship, when water was too scarce, when the grain bins ran low, when families split a single flatbread to last the day. That's when people walked to the village edge, bent down to the earth, and gathered it. They tore it by hand, tied it in bundles, and spoke no words. Because everyone knew, if you were out collecting mallow, it meant the year was bad. It was prepared simply, boiled until tender, mashed into a puree. Garlic was added, and a bit of oil, if there was any, sometimes only salt. The result was a dark green paste, thick and stringy, eaten with bread if bread was there, or just spooned directly from the bowl. It wasn't delicious, but it filled you. And most importantly, it was there. It had many names. In some places, the herb of patience. In others, the safeguard against hunger. One papyrus claimed mallow could nourish even those who had lost the will to eat. Temple scrolls never mentioned it, but in the homes of ordinary people, they knew everything about it. Its leaves were placed on wounds, its broth given to feverish babies. It didn't just feed, it healed. Mallow was deeply tied to the world of women. It was women who gathered it. They who cooked it, saved its seeds, dried the leaves for winter. It was known by hands that worked from morning to night. In some villages, people believe mallow appeared in the years when women carried the village on their backs, when the men were gone, off to build, to serve, or to die. And the children stayed behind, needing to be fed. But times changed. Markets came, warehouses, grain from distant lands. People forgot what it meant to search for food just beyond the yard. Mallow slipped away quietly, pushed out by other herbs, prettier, more profitable. Or maybe we simply stopped needing to endure. Today you might still find it in southern villages, growing from cracks in the soil. But even there, not everyone remembers what it was for. Some think it's a weed, some pull it up to feed to livestock. Yet once, it fed human beings. Mallow never asked for respect. It just grew when it was needed. It didn't demand land, it didn't wait for rain, and still it was one of the strongest supports in the lives of those history left unnamed, known only by the marks they left in the dust. Mallow was the third forgotten plant, but behind it came another, an onion that grew wild along the water. And it wasn't just food, it was the memory of what it meant to be home. Some plants are forgotten the moment you stop watering them, but others return even if you never call them. The onion that ancient Egyptians found near water was one of those. It didn't grow in fields or in gardens or under supervision. No one planted it, No one weeded it, no one tied it to rituals. It simply appeared, along ditches, near huts, beside clay paths where meltwater trickled. Its green shoots pushed through sand and mud, as if nature itself was offering help. It was wild, but it belonged. People picked it by hand, often just while passing by. Snap it off, bring it home. Its sharp scent would fill a room before it ever touched a cooking pot. It was rubbed on clay stoves, placed on windowsills to ward off insects. Its juice was smeared on bites and stings. It was everywhere. Not as the star of the story, but like a shadow, always present. It was prepared simply, boiled with mallow, fried on a flat stone with a drop of oil, tossed into soup if there was soup. More often, it was just eaten with bread. Sometimes, on its own. It burned the tongue, brought tears to the eyes, but they were tears of life. Because the taste of that onion meant one thing: you were home. In lean years, people picked it even more. There was no need to search. It came on its own, as if it sensed, now is the time to be close. People believed this onion wasn't an accident, that it was a gift. In some villages, it was placed in the corners of homes as a sign: the house is protected. Some women tucked its dried leaves into their aprons, hoping to keep their children from getting sick. It was part of everyday memory, not the kind written in books or honored in temples, the kind made of smell, taste, and the movement of a hand slicing a stalk. Children knew what it looked like before they even learned to speak. No one had to teach them, they just knew. But over time, this onion disappeared. The ditches where it grew were filled in. The streams were piped underground. The soil it lived in became construction sites, roads, concrete. Its wild lines vanished. All that remained was the cultivated onion, larger, prettier, but entirely different. Lacking that wild sting, that sharpness in the nose that reminded you, this is your land. Now it's rarely seen. Sometimes it grows from the cracks along old village fences. It rises as if asking, do you still remember me? But most people walk past. Too small, too pungent, too ordinary. And yet, it was part of a world where food grew by itself, if you knew where to look. Where a home didn't smell of perfumes, but of onions, mallow, and warm river mud. Where protection came in the form of a green stalk rising from the earth. The ditch onion was the fourth forgotten plant. But behind it came another, a root unlike any other. It tasted like the sea, yet grew in the soil. Sometimes food comes in a form so uninviting that you don't even want to touch it. Dirty, gnarled, black. But those who knew how to wait, who understood what lay beneath the skin, weren't afraid. Salsify was exactly that kind of plant. It didn't look appealing. A thin, dark root, like a stick of dried mud. Its surface rough, fibrous. At first glance, there was nothing edible about it. But inside was white flesh with a soft, slightly salty taste. When cooked, it turned tender, almost creamy. People used to say it was like eating a vegetable that remembered the sea. Salsify was a winter savior. When even mallow wilted and onions stopped growing, it stayed hidden underground. There was no need to harvest it early. You simply went out with a stick, dug it up, and brought it home. It could be stored for weeks, even without water, even in heat. Insects didn't touch it. It was made to endure. It was cooked in many ways: boiled, roasted, baked in ash. Sometimes it was added to porridge, other times eaten as is, with oil and salt. It needed no spices. Its flavor was complete. Not bold, not loud, but deep, like memory. In some places, salsify was called fasting fish, because it could be eaten on days when meat and fish were forbidden. It was especially common in villages near temples, places of strict rules, where even the smell of food was considered a sign. Salsify was quiet food, respectful food, eaten not for pleasure but to bring calm to the body. Its value went beyond the kitchen. The root's broth was used to reduce fevers, its flesh applied to burns, its juice dropped into aching ears. It lived in folk knowledge, those recipes that were never written on papyrus but passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, from father to son. Simple words, simple acts, But salsify was at the heart of them, like a cornerstone. Over time, it vanished. People stopped digging with their hands. Vegetables began arriving in baskets, crates, carts. They became uniform. But salsify doesn't like uniformity. It's different. One root is long, another twisted. One soft, another fibrous. It's hard to peel. It stains your hands. It's not made for store shelves. And so it was forgotten. Now it's almost impossible to find. Only in rare gardens kept by elders who still remember how to unearth a root in winter. Some think it's just a weed. Others have only heard of it, never tasted it. Salsify was the fifth forgotten plant. And next comes a fruit you couldn't eat right away. You had to wait for it. It had to rot before it turned sweet. Some plants demand time, patience, understanding. Medlar was one of them, a strange fruit you couldn't just pick and eat. It had to become soft first, very soft, almost rotten. On the tree, medlar looked like a small apple, dark, with an open bottom. People even called it the fruit with a mouth. Its skin was tough, its taste sharp, almost bitter. But if you left it for a few weeks in the dark, something strange would happen inside. The flesh would soften, stretch, turn sweet. The flavor would emerge, a blend of apple, wine, and spice. That's when it was ready to eat. In ancient Egypt, people knew of it. Not everyone. It was a fruit of the border villages, closer to the hills, to dried up riverbeds. It was picked in late autumn when almost nothing else would grow. Children didn't eat it. They didn't like to wait. It was kept by the elders, because they knew. In winter, medlar would remind you what sweetness was. It was stored in straw-lined baskets, placed in the shade under rooftops, sometimes even buried in clay pits. Checked daily, pressed gently with a finger. People waited for it to ripen. When the flesh turned almost liquid, it was served, with a spoon, with bread, with porridge, sometimes just on its own, as a rare treat. Its value wasn't only in taste, it symbolized patience. A fruit that taught not everything good comes right away. People placed it in the corners of homes as a sign of abundance. It was brought in as with a gift, shared, but never sold. It was too personal, too intimate. You wouldn't find it in many recipes, because no one wrote down what everyone already knew. But sometimes it appeared in sweet pies, in thick sauces, blended with ricin, honey, and spices. It became a dark paste, eaten on holidays, but more often it simply waited, alone in the shade. Over time, it vanished. New fruits came, ones you could eat right away, juicy, bright, easy. People stopped waiting. And medlar without waiting is just a bitter ball. It was removed from gardens, forgotten at markets, no longer stored. Now it exists mostly in botanical gardens, nature reserves. Occasionally it grows wild, unseen, strange, unrecognized. Its fruits fall, rot, disappear. And yet, it once knew how to be sweet, even after the winter had passed. Medlar was the sixth forgotten plant, but next came a humble herb that grew everywhere. No one planted it, but without it, no hungry year could have been survived. Not all food grows by command. Some plants simply appear where no one expects them. At the edge of a path, in the shadow of a wall, between stones, in the cracks of a courtyard. Chickweed, known to generations of Egyptian peasants, was just such a plant, humble, overlooked, but essential to survival. No one called for it. No one sowed it, nurtured it, or watered it. It was the first to appear after a brief winter rain, covering the earth in a carpet of tiny, delicate leaves, as if nature itself were reminding people that survival was still possible. No one searched for it on purpose, but when the hunger months began, people knew where to find it. Near water, at the base of trees, on damp soil behind the house. Its leaves were soft and cool to the touch, with a slight sheen. They could be eaten raw, boiled, added to simple soups, or ground with garlic into a thick paste. Its greatest value was that it grew when everything else was still asleep, when the earth had nothing more to give. It was especially treasured in early spring, when food stores were nearly getting and new crops hadn't yet broken through the soil. In moments like that, chickweed became the first green on the table. It was rich in vitamins, especially the kind of fresh green strength people lacked after winter. Elder women knew how to use it to bring down a child's fever, how to apply it to swelling, how to steep it into tea when illness lingered. Even the poorest had chickweed because it couldn't be taken away. It grew anywhere there was a drop of moisture. No one brought it to market. No one praised it in public squares. No songs were sung about it. But when the grain was gone, when there wasn't even a single bean flatbread left, when bread became a luxury, it was chickweed that saved lives. It didn't fill the belly for long, but it helped people hang on. It kept starvation at bay. It asked for nothing but attention. It was gathered quickly, by hand, often just before dawn, while dew still clung to the leaves. It was cut with a sickle, scraped into a clay bowl, washed in the river. Children were told, if there's nothing left, look for green by the walls. And they knew what that meant. But in time, its meaning disappeared. Markets came, offering greens all year round. People began to call chickweed a weed. They pulled it out, poisoned it with fertilizer. Those who had once relied on it now looked on with indifference, as if it had never been food at all. Its worth was swallowed by forgetting. Now almost no one notices when it sprouts again by a doorstep, under a fence in the shade of a stone. It still reaches for the light, just as it did thousands of years ago, asking for nothing in return. But instead of gratitude, it meets boots, trampling what once saved lives. Chickweed was the seventh forgotten plant. Next came a root with black skin. It looked unsettling, bore a name that sounded more like a disease. But beneath it held soft, nourishing flesh that more than once became the only food to survive a long winter. Sometimes words sound scarier than the things they describe. The name scorzonera has the ring of a sickness, something people might want to stay far away from. But ancient Egyptians knew that behind this strange name was a root you could count on when everything else failed. At first glance, it wasn't pretty, long, thin, black, wrapped in a tough, cracked skin like tree bark. It stained your hands, left behind sticky, dark marks that were hard to wash off. But those who knew weren't afraid. They peeled it patiently, stripping away the dark layer until the white, firm flesh beneath began to shine. That was the treasure, hidden beneath an unwelcoming surface. Scorzonera was dug up at the very end of autumn. Its roots reached deeper than most, making it one of the few plants that could survive even during drought. It didn't fear the cold, didn't rot easily, and could be stored until spring, if carefully buried again in dry soil or sand. People knew if you had a bundle of scorzonera at home, winter would be easier. It was cooked much like salsify, boiled, stewed, chopped into broths. Its taste was gentler, slightly sweet, with a hint of nuttiness. It was eaten with bread, sometimes baked into flatbreads, roasted with onions and vinegar. It didn't need meat or spices. It was a complete meal on its own. But it was valued for more than taste or nutrition. Its juice was believed to purify the blood. Its decoctions were used for stomach pain. Elderly women rubbed it on aching joints and applied it to insect bites. In folk memory, scorzonera wasn't just food. It was Sion. It was medicine. In some villages, it was called the night root, because people often dug it up after sundown, when the heat had faded and the earth released its treasures more easily. It was grown near houses, along footpaths, sometimes right by the walls. It needed little water, required no care. People left it alone, and it survived. Even if it wasn't fully harvested, it would return the next year. It was part of a quiet, resilient life where what mattered wasn't appearance, but essence. But as the times changed, scorzonera disappeared. People stopped planting it. They began to see it as too dirty, too difficult, too inconvenient. It was pushed out by smoother, brighter root vegetables, easier to sell, easier to ship. People stopped digging with their hands. They began shopping with their eyes. Now scorzonera can only be found in old texts, among plant enthusiasts, in forgotten gardens. But its memory lives on in stories of the years when it alone stood between people and hunger. When its flavor meant the home was still standing, there was still food, and winter was not a death sentence. Scorzonera was the eighth forgotten plant, and after it came a kind of green known to everyone. It wasn't bold, didn't have a strong taste, but its stalks rose from the soil in early spring. Its blades stayed green even when everything else had faded. People called it onion, but it wasn't quite an onion at all. Sometimes plants carry names that don't truly belong to them. They're mistaken, underestimated, overlooked, until hardship arrives. False onion was one of those. It wasn't a real onion. It had no large bulb, no strong aroma, no bold flavor. But it had one trait people valued above all. It didn't die in winter. It was a plant that grew along walls, beneath fences, between the stones. Well, man, its thin, hollow stalks rose from the soil like green feathers, even when the air turned cold and other plants disappeared. No one planted it each year. Once rooted, it lived for decades, spreading, multiplying, pushing out emptiness. It was gathered early in the morning when dew still clung to the leaves and the stems were firm, cool, and damp. It was cut in bundles, quickly, carefully, then added straight into meals. It didn't need long cooking or special preparation. It went into stews, into porridge, into bread. It was eaten fresh to bring a taste of life into the dullness of winter food. It was never the main dish. It was a sarmant, a subtle touch. But that very touch made meals come alive. Among limp roots, dry flatbreads, and salted beans, it offered a taste that whispered of spring. It reminded people that green would return, that warmth was near, that life continued, even in the cold. In some villages, they called it eternal onion. In others, the poor man's onion. It brought no profit, it wasn't sold, but it was always kept nearby because people knew it wouldn't fail them. It rose again after drought. It survived on stone. It grew in dust, beneath people's feet, until someone bent down, picked it, dropped it in a pot, and remembered the taste of home. Elders used to say the false onion was a plant that understood family. It came to places where people truly lived, where there were children, a stove, a bucket of water. It sensed the warmth and gave something back. Not something flashy or proud, but something reliable. But like so many humble plants, the false onion faded away. It was pushed out by bright new varieties. People wanted uniform shapes, consistent sizes, products easy to sell. The false onion didn't fit that world. It was too wild, too alive, too unpredictable. Now it's hardly seen. Occasionally it pushes up near old houses, stretching between stones, through cracks in the ground. People pass by without noticing. They don't know this isn't just some weed. It was once a symbol of endurance, a silent witness to hard times. It saw people through cold seasons, welcome spring. It lived beside humans like an old dog, always there, always ready to help. The false onion was the ninth forgotten plant. History remembers the plants that don't hide, the ones that grow tall, smell bold, and demand respect. Lovage was one of them, a herb that couldn't be mistaken for anything else. Its stalks could reach the waist of a grown adult. Its leaves were large, deep green, richly veined. But the most striking thing was the scent. Strong, saturated, unmistakable. A mix of celery, spice, freshness, and something almost bitter. One bundle was enough to fill an entire house with its presence. Lovage grew slowly. A single plant could live for decades, spreading wider each year. It didn't need to be replanted. It rose on its own each spring, as if it simply couldn't help but grow. It was planted near walls, by wells, at the doorstep, not for beauty, but for purpose. The leaves were dried, the stalks cut, the roots dug up. It was brewed into teas to soothe stomach pain. It flavored soups, stews, legume dishes. Just one sprig could transform a simple porridge into something that smelled like a celebration. But lovage wasn't just culinary. Its power was felt in every corner of life. Women rinsed their hair in its decoction to stay strong and ward off illness. It was hung near infants' beds, tossed into ovens so food wouldn't spoil, placed in chests to keep insects away from clothing. It was a plant that guarded, not quietly or humbly, but with confidence, like a sentinel, like a house spirit. It was a symbol of warmth, strength, abundance, and that's why it was treasured. It grew where people knew that the world wasn't always kind, but the home could still be a place that smelled of safety. But time moved on. New spices arrived, new herbs, new ideas about flavor. People grew afraid of strong smells. Lovage was called harsh, overpowering, unnecessary. It was pulled up, forgotten, replaced by gentler herbs, ones easier to package and preserve, the kind that didn't argue, only decorate. Now it's nearly gone. Sometimes you'll find it in wild gardens, on the edges of villages, near the walls of old houses. Sometimes it's grown by those who still remember. But most people don't know its name, can't feel its strength, don't recall that it was once food, medicine, and protection. Lovage was the 10th forgotten plant. 9 herbs, roots, and fruits. 9 lives hidden in the soil. They weren't trendy, they weren't beautiful, but they were necessary. They were there when the world was simpler. When flavor came from the ground, not the shelf. When food was made by hand, not wrapped in plastic. They disappeared not because they failed, but because they were inconvenient. Their taste was real. Their scent, too strong. Their shapes, too irregular. And the world decided everything should look the same. But maybe they'll return. Rise again, where someone remembers how to search for food not in a store, but in the earth. Where someone plants not for profit, but for memory. And then, the lotus will bloom again in warm waters. Garlic will hang once more above the door. Mallow will feed a family through a hard day. And lovage will fill a home with the scent of a life worth breathing in. If you enjoyed this story, trust me, the next ones will be even more powerful. You're about to hear things no one else is telling. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what's coming. If this video moved you, leave a like and drop a comment. And most importantly, share it with someone you care about. See you in the next video.